September 1st, 2025. Sitting atop the roof of a 4-story human housing complex in Rochester, I cracked open a large bottle of green soda purchased the day before and placed it to my replica lips, imbibing the sweet fluid and savoring its nostalgic sugar content. Back in Fargo, one of my bodies was walking down an alleyway when it came upon a group of masked humans harassing a young male with demands of his currency. Their requests were far from polite, though the presence of a gun in their leader's hand was evidently rather persuasive, as the boy quickly produced his wallet and fumbled about therein for any cash in his possession. Approaching the group, I decided that it would be in my better interest to give them the opportunity to walk away. "I would cease this activity were I in your place," my body in Fargo told them, calmly approaching the group despite the armed one's orders for it to step back. "Relax, pal," the leader croaked with a sinister drawl. "This ain't your fight, so step the fuck off." "Is it not?" I cocked my head, continuing to approach as the leader aimed his gun at me and discharged it directly into the side of my head. My biomass splattered against a dumpster behind me, but I did not flinch. "A waste of ammunition," I concluded, ripping the gun from this one's grasp and pinning him by the neck against a nearby wall. Immediately, the other attempted muggers took off, abandoning their comrade to my grasp. On the rooftop in Rochester, the nearby sound of light chirping drew my attention to a nest of sticks and straw perched atop the apartment building's water tank. Setting down my soda and climbing up to observe, I saw 4 little birds, their feathers not yet grown and their eyes still shut. Part of me contemplated consuming them. They were a reasonable source of calories after all. That being said, it felt distinctly unfair to attack creatures in such a pitiful state. I wasn't exactly starved of biomass in this city anyway, so I made the decision to leave them as they were. As for the mugger in Fargo, the presence of his planned victim watching my actions ultimately became the deciding factor in my choice not to devour the minor malignancy. I did not wish to distress the healthy cell any further with such a wanton display of carnage. Protruding a tendril from my torso, I grabbed the man's left ankle and twisted it out of position, leaving him unable to run away as I tossed him to the ground. "You should alert the police," I informed the victim casually, ignoring the mugger's pained groans as I expeditiously removed myself from the scene. Climbing down from the water tank and returning to my seat atop the building in Rochester, I took a long swig of the green soda whilst peering out over the horizon. It was early morning, with the sun's light only just beginning to bleed out into the sky above, painting around the clouds in warm, pleasant hues of orange and pink. After finishing my drink and digesting the bottle itself for good measure, I returned to the streets below and once again blended in amongst the ever-bustling crowds of humanity. Hours passed by as I wandered the streets, quietly observing mankind's rhythm. On one street corner, a young man strummed away at the strings of a guitar, singing along to its melody in a melancholy tone. In front of him was a jar containing a few notes of currency. In front of me, I saw an elderly woman drop a small bill into the jar. Clearly, this human was making music as a way to obtain currency. Passing this human by, I too made a small offering as thanks for his music. Making my way down the street, I produced the phone in my pocket and attempted to check the social media applications. Unfortunately, the lack of available Wi-Fi networks precluded me from doing so. Looking around, I saw an old man sitting in a wheeled chair by the road with a sign held between his hands. "Disabled veteran? Need money for food. Anything helps." As I approached him, the figure looked up at me with a kind smile. "Hello, son. How's life been treating you?" "Better than it's treated you, it appears," I noted, handing him notes of currency totaling $20. "Would you happen to know where I can find Wi-Fi around here?" I asked him. "The local library has it for free," he replied, unbothered by my question. "It's a few blocks ahead of us on 2nd Street. "Thank you." I nodded and began to walk away. Something about the man, however, gave me pause. After a few steps, I turned back around and once again spoke to him. "Your legs do not work. Why is that?" For a moment, he almost seemed surprised. Then his expression changed from confusion to warmth once more. "Sorry. It's just that most people don't really bother to ask," he continued. "It's a spinal injury from Vietnam. A piece of shrapnel from a landmine. I'm paralyzed from the waist down." "Vietnam. The site of a proxy war with the Soviets, I hummed, taking a seat beside the man's chair. You fought in it? I wanted to serve my country, the man chuckled bitterly. Of course, all I was really serving were the arms manufacturers. This note intrigued me. I had read about the Vietnam War, but only in passing. There were references to protests and public outrage, but nothing overly specific. This was an excellent opportunity to gather more information on the deeper meaning behind human warfare. What do you mean by that? I asked, probing the man for more knowledge. For soldiers, war is hell. American, Soviet, Vietnamese, it didn't matter. We all bled the same color and there was lots of blood to go around. The folks who made our guns, though, they made off like bandits. There was a certain sadness to the way this human spoke, not the weighty words of a comic book hero or the musings of a villain, just the dry tiredness of a tool long worn past its usefulness. What happened when you came back? I asked. There wasn't a parade, I'll tell you that, he chuckled, shaking his head. The folks who'd protested the war called me a monster. The ones who'd bankrolled it called me a hero, then quietly tossed me aside. The worst part wasn't losing my legs. It was learning that I'd lost them for nothing. Now people just cross the street to avoid having to look at me, a relic of a long-gone mistake. What would you do if you could walk again? I asked the man curiously. Again, he fell silent at first. You know, I ask myself that question at least once a day. I never had a good answer for it. Would you like to find out? After a moment of regarding me with confusion and perhaps even fear, the man nodded his head softly. I suppose I would. When I reached out to shake his hand, he reciprocated the gesture without hesitation. My grip was tight, applying just enough pressure that he wouldn't notice the miniature needle injecting a battalion of my cells into his bloodstream. What's your name? I asked the man, consciously directing the newly breached cells to begin the slow, day-long process of painlessly repairing his spine. Most folks don't bother asking. You can call me Tom, he replied with a nod. Yours? I am Samael, I told him before silently disappearing once more into the crowd. The more I learned about human systems, the less it seemed I understood them. Abandoning a damaged cell rather than repurposing or repairing it went against everything I had expected from a supposedly functional body. Just as Tom had promised, the library wasn't far. Traveling just a few blocks, I soon came upon the elaborate structure of yellowish concrete and glass that glittered in the morning sun. Stepping inside and pulling out my phone, I quickly accessed the building's Wi-Fi and navigated over to an empty table. Apparently, libraries like this place were common throughout the United States. Their main purpose was to allow for the free borrowing of books, though depending on location, some offered other services. This, my network quickly concluded, was an excellent opportunity to gather more information. For all their societal dysfunction, I respected the humans' decision to make knowledge so freely available. After a minute or two of deliberation between my cells, I stood up once more and began sifting through the available texts. Much of my searching was limited to the non-fiction sections, science and history chief among them. On occasion, I would pick out a textbook from amongst these and quickly leaf through it. Offloading the reading process onto my biomass hub in Minneapolis, I was able to make it through each book in only about an hour each. First among the texts I selected was a detailed history of the Cold War. The book began with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the nuclear weapons that concluded the Second World War. For the sake of brevity, the history book I had read before left much out of the story that this text expounded heavily upon. I learned in detail about each proxy war of puppeteered powers and about the space race that brought humanity to the surface of their moon. Meanwhile, if Hiroshima and Nagasaki were respectful nods to the universe's destructive power, then Tsar Bomba was a love letter. Weaponizing the power of nuclear fusion to essentially drop a small star on one's enemies was almost comical in its sheer overkill nature. When humanity looked to the stars with wonder, was it the possibility of life that intrigued them so, or merely the sheer destruction such bodies could wrought? For my next book, I was predictably drawn to the biology section. Specifically piquing my interest was a tome labeled Introduction to Biophysics. A thin film of dust coated its bulky spine, concealing the blue hue of the text's leather cover. Clearly, this book had not been selected in some time. Picking it out and beginning to read, however, the sheer density of useful information contained within left me baffled. Contained within its myriad chapters, I found detailed explanations for how Earth's biological organisms evolved to take advantage of physics. Using the knowledge obtained from within this book, I was able to further optimize my human form's false musculature, multiplying its strength tenfold. Upon absorbing all the knowledge I could from the biophysics book, I respectfully slotted it back into place, regarding the repository of information with a reverence I had not expected to possess for an inanimate object. As my fingers left the book's spine and began to brush between its neighbors in search of similarly useful knowledge, it was the presence of a distinctly unexpected book that next caught my attention. It was shorter than the others, but no less dense with pages. Whereas every other time on this shelf referenced biology, or at the very least science in general, this one displayed a distinctly different subject: philosophy through the ages. Philosophy. At the time, this word conjured within me only vague notions of human moral systems. Perhaps it was disdain that led me to pluck the book from its place, annoyance that something so seemingly useless would be placed among such valuable tomes. However, as I carried this text out of the section, curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself opening it up. I read the preamble, then the first section, the first chapter, onto the second, the third. Somewhere within this haze of knowledge absorption, this book had caught my attention and simply refused to relinquish it. From Aquinas to Descartes, Plato to Marx, human understandings of morality seemed to vary as much as their proponents did. Sifting through their ethical propositions, however, it was clear to me that not all were created equal. Ayn Rand's objectivism proposed selfishness as the highest moral imperative, but to sacrifice cohesion for personal growth was the methodology of a cancer cell. Social Darwinism wholly misapplied survival of the fittest, using a faulty interpretation of biology to justify cruelty and apathy. Friedrich Nietzsche put forth that it was the nature of the strong to dominate the weak, even going as far as to claim that mercy and cooperation were falsehoods meant to shackle the strong. Ultimately, the systems I most found myself attracted to were utilitarianism and stoicism, doing the most good within one's power whilst mitigating harm wherever possible. Other human philosophies I felt relied much too heavily upon hierarchies to determine right and wrong. This was just math, a clean, simple, and elegant equation for optimal assistance. Outside, a fleet of siren-blaring vehicles roared past on their way to some unknown destination, drawing my attention away from the words on pages and back into the world around me. Human emergency response vehicles, I murmured contemplatively, placing the philosophy book back down onto a nearby table. I should see where they're going. Exiting the library as discreetly as possible and wandering with false aimlessness into a nearby alleyway, I carefully surveyed the area around me for witnesses or cameras and, finding none, altered my form into something less identifiable. The false pink of my human skin writhed and roiled as it changed color and texture, becoming a meaty dark red that rippled with every step I took. Atop the roof of a nearby building, I honed my senses until the sound of those sirens once again bled into my perception. From there, I launched a tendril of biomass into the wall of an adjacent building and with a yank launched myself from one rooftop to the next. The movements were a tad awkward at first. I envied the ease with which comic book heroes like the Sticky One did this. Eventually, however, I achieved something resembling a rhythm in the midst of my traversal. It was not difficult to spot the building the vehicles were headed for. Thick plumes of black smoke overshadowed the skyline, its intimidating sprawl having originated from a single apartment. Clearly, something within had caught fire, which had since spread past the point of control. This was unfortunate. My body was not built to withstand being engulfed in flames. Perched on the rooftop across from this disaster site, I spent a moment restructuring my cells, fortifying those on the surface with whatever spare moisture I could conjure. Down below, a group of humans in what looked to be some form of armor were spraying the flames with jets of pressurized water, struggling to clear a path so that they could enter the building. Some distance from the armored humans, a group of bystanders had gathered to observe the grim spectacle. Some were being actively held back from entering the building, presumably in a misguided effort to rescue their loved ones. One of them saw me stop the roof and pointed, instantly drawing the attention of the others. Cell phone cameras captured my movements as I leapt from the rooftop and launched myself through an open window. Smoke and flames obscured my vision as I searched the first suite for any humans in need of assistance. Once I cleared that first apartment, I moved on to the next. "Insufficient time," I growled, lashing forth tendrils from my arms and torso to force open every nearby door. Back at street level, a fraction of my biomass oozed out from the nearby manhole cover and slithered around to where first responders were attempting to carve an entrance for themselves. Saturated with water from below, this blob of biomass quickly passed by the firemen and began smothering flames to allow for their safe entry. "The hell is that?" I heard one of the armored humans shout, as in front of them their comrades were already filing in to search for survivors. "Not a clue, but it's helping us at least," another replied, taking care not to make contact with my secondary form as they sprinted inside. The first human I found was an elderly woman, trapped by flames in her bathroom. Though initially distressed when I flung open the door, she seemed to calm down upon the explanation of my intent. Wrapping a carefully spaced series of tendrils around her torso like a harness, I lowered her down from the window and onto the ground below before repeating the process for her 2 cats. After 5 minutes, I had managed to save 3 humans, 6 cats, and a very small, very angry dog who was none too pleased by my presence. This was not enough. The rescues themselves took very little time, but searching for those in need was a costly task. Then I remembered something. It wasn't detailed very well in the biophysics textbook, but there was a small side blurb regarding something called echolocation, using infrasound to image the area around oneself. With no time to waste, I honed the sensory structures of my ears as much as I could manage before letting loose a loud chitter that echoed through the apartment. At first I achieved no results. Continuing to experiment with different frequencies as I went, eventually one seemed to work. For a moment, the sheer quantity of information newly made available overwhelmed me. After offloading the interpretation to my Minneapolis biomass, however, I was able to get a relatively clear image of things happening around me. 3 survivors, second room on the left. Hastily making my way there, I was greeted with a mixture of fear and awe by the family of 3 who saw me kick down their door. "Who are you?" the father grilled me, no doubt having expected someone less me. "Unimportant," I told him, shattering the jammed nearby window with a punch and clearing out the glass before guiding the trio to the ground with ease. At last, as the final survivors below me were being escorted out by human first responders, and the floors they had not yet reached cleared by my main body, I approached a window leading out to the back of the building and fled the scene, retracting my secondary biomass and returning it to the sewer below.